My girlfriend said, "I'm not ready to settle down with someone like you right now." I agreed and let her leave. Months later, she watched my life from social media as everything she wanted started happening without her in it. "I'm not ready to settle down with someone like you right now." She didn't yell it. She didn't even raise her voice. She said it the way you'd read a rejection letter out loud, measured, almost practiced, like she'd been rehearsing it in the car on the way over. And I just stood there, holding a mug of coffee that had gone completely cold 20 minutes ago, staring at her across the kitchen like the floor had shifted slightly beneath me. The part that hit hardest wasn't the "not ready." People aren't ready for things all the time. That's forgivable. That's human. No, the part that sat in me like a splinter buried just deep enough that you couldn't reach, it was the phrase she used to get there. Someone like you. Not someone in your situation. Not someone still figuring things out. Someone like you. As if I were a type. A category. A box she'd checked and found lacking. I didn't say anything back. I didn't defend myself. I didn't make the speech I could feel forming somewhere in the back of my throat. I just stood there with that cold coffee and let the words settle into the room. And somewhere in the quiet that followed, something shifted in me. Not dramatically, not loudly, just quietly, a door closed. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have possibly known standing in that kitchen in January with cold coffee and humiliation sitting warm in my chest, was that the moment she walked out of that apartment, a version of my life she would have done almost anything to be part of was just beginning to take shape. Let me back up, because the leaving didn't happen without warning. There were signs. I just chose not to see them, which, if I'm being honest with myself, was its own kind of choice. We were 2 years in at that point. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. I was 28. Tessa was 26. We'd met at a backyard birthday party the summer before last. The kind of easy, warm evening where the music is just low enough to talk over, and nobody wants to be the first one to go home. We'd been inseparable, or something close to it, from the third date onward. She was sharp and funny and made decisions the way confident people do, quickly, without second-guessing. I liked that about her. I liked that she knew what she wanted. Turns out, what she wanted eventually stopped including me. The cooling had been happening for about a month before the kitchen conversation. Nothing I could point at directly. Nothing that would have made sense to describe to someone else. Just a general dimming. She stopped texting first. She started making weekend plans without mentioning me until I asked, and then mentioning me in a way that felt slightly like an afterthought. She'd look at her phone during dinner. Not rudely. Not aggressively. Just distracted. The way you look at your phone when there's somewhere better to be. I told myself it was work stress. Tessa was in event planning, and her company had taken on 3 large contracts back-to-back in the fall. She was tired. Everyone gets like that when the calendar fills up. I pushed the feeling down. I told myself I was being insecure. That was the first mistake. The second mistake was asking her about it without being prepared for what honesty sounds like. It was a Sunday. She'd come over after brunch with her friends. She seemed lighter than she'd been in weeks. Almost relieved, somehow. Looking back, I understand why. We were on the couch watching something I can't even remember. I muted the TV. "Can I ask you something?" She turned to look at me. "Are we okay?" A pause. Not a long one, but one of those pauses that has a whole conversation inside it. "I don't know," she said. She wasn't being cruel. She was being careful, which, in some ways, was more unsettling. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," she said. "About where I want to be. About what I need the next few years to look like." "Okay," I said cautiously. "And I'm not sure we're moving in the same direction," she said. "What does that mean exactly?" She tucked her legs up under herself on the couch, a habit she had when she was about to say something difficult. Making herself smaller, maybe. Taking up less space before expanding into something big. "I want someone who's settled," she said. "Someone who's already figured out where they're going. Someone who can give me a kind of security and stability that makes me feel like things are moving forward." I went very still. "You think I'm not stable. I think you're still building," she said carefully. "And I'm not saying that's wrong. But I'm at a place right now where I need more certainty than I feel like you can offer." Something tightened in my chest. The list of things I wanted to say formed fast. The job offer I was in final talks about, the project I'd been quietly developing for over a year, the apartment upgrade I'd been planning for spring. But something stopped me. Pride, partly. And also the understanding that none of it should have needed to be a pitch. "So what are you saying?" I asked. She exhaled. Looked at me directly. "I'm not ready to settle down with someone like you right now." There it was. Full sentence. delivered without flinching. I set the remote down on the cushion. Okay, I said. She blinked. Okay. If that's where you are, I'm not going to argue with it. She looked at me for a moment like I'd said something in a foreign language. I expected you to push back, she said. What would you like me to say? She opened her mouth, closed it again. I don't know, she admitted. Then I think this is the answer, I said. She left about an hour later. She'd clearly come prepared for it, or prepared for something close to it, because the gathering of her things was efficient in a way that didn't feel improvised. Her charger from the nightstand, her cleanser and moisturizer from the bathroom counter, the gray sweater she'd left over the back of the chair by the door 3 weeks ago and never reclaimed. I stood in the hallway and watched her. I didn't offer to help. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything dramatic. I just watched, the way you watch something that you know you can't stop. And when the door clicked shut, that specific, quiet, final click, I walked back to the couch, sat down in the silence she'd left behind, and let myself feel all of it. Because it hurt. It hurt in a way I want to be honest about, because pretending it didn't would be a disservice to every person who's ever been on the receiving end of someone like you. It didn't hurt like a fight. It hurt like a verdict, like someone had reviewed the evidence carefully and returned with a judgment. And the judgment was, not enough. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I sat there a long time that night. The TV was still muted. The city outside made its usual noise. And I just sat. I called my friend Owen the next morning. Owen and I had been close since college. The kind of friendship where full sentences are optional and context is automatic. She left, I told him. A beat. Because. She said she's not ready to settle down with someone like me. Another pause. Like you how? That's the part one keeps sitting with, I said. He didn't rush to fill the space. Owen never rushes. What are you going to do, he asked. I'm not chasing her, I said. Good, he said. Just that. No lecture. No pep talk. Just good. That one word from the right person is worth more than a half hour of sympathy from someone who doesn't know you. The first week was the worst. Not because I was falling apart. I wasn't. I was functioning fine on the outside. Work, groceries, the ordinary mechanics of a life continuing to move. But the apartment had a new shape to it. An absence with a specific texture. I'd reach for my phone to send her something funny I'd seen, and catch myself mid-reach. I'd wake up Saturday morning with no plans, and realize the blankness of the day was now just mine. I'd make coffee and automatically reach for the oat milk she kept in my fridge, and then remember I hadn't bought it for weeks. The absence wasn't dramatic. It was just everywhere. Small and persistent, like a draft you can feel but can't find the source of. I went back to work on Monday and threw myself into it harder than I had in months. Not to distract myself. Because something had clarified. Because something she said, someone like you, had lodged itself somewhere in my chest in a way that wasn't entirely painful. It was also motivating. Not in the small, spite-fueled way. In the bigger, quieter way. The way that says, prove it. Not to her. To yourself. Here's what Tessa didn't fully know about at that point. For the past 14 months, alongside my main job in product development, I'd been quietly building something. A workflow tool for small creative teams, agencies, freelance collectives, boutique studios. Nothing that would change the world, but something I'd built from scratch, out of a genuine frustration with the tools that already existed, and had been testing quietly with 8 small businesses who'd agreed to try it in exchange for honest feedback. The feedback had moved, over months, from interesting to useful to something closer to, when can I actually pay for this? I hadn't told Tessa much about it. Not because I was keeping secrets, but because every time I brought it up, the conversation would die fast. She'd change the subject, or half listen in a way where you could see the moment her attention stepped out of the room. Or she'd say something like, is that actually going to amount to something, though? The first time she said it, I explained more, gave her context, walked her through the problem it solved. The second time, I shortened the explanation. By the third time, I stopped bringing it up at all. I just built it alone, in the early mornings before the day started. In my own quiet, without an audience. 2 weeks after Tessa left, the job offer came through. The one I'd been in final negotiations on for almost a month. Senior product role at a remote-first company. Significant jump in pay. The kind of offer that lands and makes you sit for a while before you start celebrating, because it takes a moment to accept that something you worked toward actually materialized. I accepted it before the end of the week. The morning after I signed, I called Owen. She doesn't know, does she? He said. It wasn't a question. No, I said. Timing, he said. Yeah, I said. Don't tell her. I wasn't planning to. He laughed. Good, he said. I moved apartments in March. I'd been planning it for a while. The old place was a fine apartment for a man in his mid-20s who was figuring things out, but it had stopped feeling like where I was going. It had started feeling like where I was waiting. The new place was on the 12th floor of a building across town. Corner unit. Massive windows. Morning light that came in at an angle that made the whole place feel golden before 9. A kitchen with actual counter space. The kind where you could spread out and cook a real meal without feeling like you were solving a puzzle. I moved everything myself over a weekend. A friend helped with the furniture. I unpacked box by box, put on a playlist, and when the last box was emptied, I went and stood at the windows in the fading afternoon light and looked out at the city. Quiet. Not healed. Not completely. But something adjacent to calm. Like I'd landed somewhere I was supposed to be. Owen came over that first full weekend to help me put together some shelving units. We ordered pizza. Sat on the floor because I hadn't bought a couch yet. Just a desk, a bed frame, and good intentions. He looked around at the space the way you look at someone's new apartment when it's genuinely impressive and you're not going to make a big deal of it. This is a real place, he said finally. Yeah, I said. She would have loved this, he said. He wasn't being cruel. Owen doesn't do cruel. He was just being honest. And he was right. Tessa had talked, more than once, about wanting to live somewhere like this. Good light, real space, a city view, a grown-up apartment that felt intentional instead of temporary. I chewed my pizza and didn't respond. You okay? He asked. Yeah, I said. And the strange thing was, I meant it. Not in the way you say it when you're holding yourself together. In the actual way. The way where the word is accurate. Owen looked at me for a moment to check. Decided I was telling the truth. Good, he said. We ate the rest of it in comfortable quiet. The months that followed were the strangest combination of lonely and alive I'd ever felt at the same time. I was building every morning. The new job required focus and energy during the day, but my mornings were entirely mine. From 5:30 until 9, before the first call of the day, I was at the desk by those windows, iterating on the tool. Fixing what didn't work. Rewriting what worked badly. Getting on early calls with my beta testers, who by now had become something closer to collaborators. One of them, a freelance designer in her own studio, told me flat out that the onboarding experience made her want to quit. Walk me through exactly where, I said. She did. I fixed it. Then fixed it again. Then fixed it a third time until she said, okay, now I'd actually recommend this. That conversation was worth more than any investor meeting I've sat in since. There's something about working in silence, real silence, the absence of audience kind, that strips the work down to whether it's actually good. When no one is watching, you can't perform. You can't build for the reaction. You just build. And either the thing is solid or it isn't. Either it does what it's supposed to do or it falls over when you push it. No one to be impressive for. Just the work and you, and whether you're being honest with each other. I think those mornings were the best building I've ever done. Not despite the quiet. Because of it. I was 3 months into the new apartment when I ran into Gwen. Tessa's friend. One of the close ones. I was on a coffee run before a morning call when she spotted me on the sidewalk. Hey, she said, stopping. Hey, I said back. The specific pause that happens when two people are calculating how much the situation requires them to say. You look good, she said. Thanks. Things have been good. She nodded slowly. Something moved across her face. Something I couldn't fully name. That's really great, she said. Then, quieter, the way people say things they decided to say before the conversation started. She asks about you. I looked at her directly. What do you mean? I mean, she asks. Gwen said simply. How you're doing. What you're up to. I don't have much to tell her because we don't really cross paths anymore, so I don't have a lot. But I thought you should know. I held that for a moment. Thanks for telling me, I said. Gwen nodded, gave me that half smile that people give when they've said the thing they came to say, and went on her way. I stood on the sidewalk for a few extra seconds, picked up my coffee, walked back to my morning. The tool launched in April. 14 months of early mornings and late-night adjustments and brutal feedback, and 3 complete interface rewrites. No launch party. No countdown. I posted it quietly in 4 online communities I'd been a part of for a year, sent a personal note to each of my beta testers, and went to bed. The next morning, I had 412 new signups. I stared at the number for a long time. Then I made coffee. Then I stared at it again. By the end of the week, it was over 2,000. My inbox was fuller than I could manage in a day. There were messages from a studio owner in Portland who said it had changed how her entire team structured project handoffs. There was a message from a small agency in Manchester who asked if I did custom integrations. There was a message from someone who had found it through a forum post and written 3 paragraphs about why it solved a problem they'd been trying to solve for years. I was running on about 3 hours of sleep a night, and I felt more alive than I had in years. Owen called on Friday. "I heard your thing went live," he said. "It did. And 2,000 signups in a week." A pause. A real pause. The kind you get when someone has to recalibrate. "What?" "Yeah. I'm coming over." "You don't." "I'm coming over," he said. He showed up an hour later with a bottle of whiskey and a complete absence of restraint. We sat at the kitchen table. I had a table by then, and I told him everything. The numbers. The messages. The feedback that had started arriving from people I'd never reached out to, who'd found it organically. The studio owner in Portland. The agency in Manchester. All of it. Owen listened to every word. Then he raised his glass and said, "She left too soon." "She left exactly when she was supposed to leave," I said. He looked at me. "I mean that," I said. "If she'd stayed, I don't know how much of this I actually builds." I was comfortable. Comfortable in a way that made me slow. "You're saying she was the obstacle?" "I'm saying I was using the relationship as permission to coast," I said. "And she removed that permission." Owen thought about that for a long moment. "That's annoyingly self-aware," he said. I laughed. "The kind that comes from somewhere honest. The kind you can't manufacture." Here's what I hadn't told anyone yet. Not even Owen. The piece of it that reframes everything that came before. In the last 6 or 7 months of the relationship, I had tried, twice, to share the project with Tessa. Not in a desperate way. Not as a "please believe in me" speech. Just sharing. The way you share things with the person who's supposed to be in your corner. The first time, I walked her through the basic concept. The problem it solved, the gap in the market, the businesses I was already testing it with. She listened. She was polite about it. And then she said, "That seems like a lot of work for something that might not go anywhere." I told myself she was being realistic. I told myself I appreciated the honesty. I did not actually feel either of those things. The second time was different. I was genuinely, visibly excited. I'd just had a breakthrough with the core workflow interface. Something that had been frustrating me for weeks had suddenly clicked into place. I sat down with her after dinner with my laptop. "Can I show you something?" I asked. She said yes. I walked her through it. The new interface. The way it handled handoffs between team members. The feedback I'd gotten from the beta testers that week. She looked at the screen. She looked at me. And she said, "I think you should be careful about getting too attached to things that might not pan out." I closed the laptop slowly. "You don't think it'll work?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. "I think you have a lot of ideas," she said carefully. "And some of them might work out. I just don't want you to keep delaying real life waiting on a long shot." Real life. I turned that phrase over in my head for days. As if she'd drawn a line on the map. As if she'd decided which territory counted as real. And mine was outside of it. I closed the laptop that night and didn't open it in front of her again. Not in protest. Not dramatically. I just stopped inviting her into that part of my world. Because somewhere in that conversation, I understood that she had already made up her mind about what it was. And explaining further wouldn't change that. What I did instead was build. Quietly. In the mornings before she woke up when she stayed over. On lunch breaks she didn't know about. In the late evenings when I told her I was tired and she'd already gone home. I built it alone, without an audience. Without anyone's permission. Without anyone's belief except my own. And then she left. And I built it faster. 2 months after the launch, I got an email from a small venture studio. They'd come across the tool through one of the communities I'd posted in. They had some questions. They wanted to schedule a call. I replied that Thursday worked. I told no one. The call lasted 40 minutes. They asked sharp questions. I had answers I didn't have to search for. At the end, they said they wanted to explore a seed investment conversation. I thanked them. Ended the call. Sat in my kitchen for a while staring at the ceiling in the way you stare at ceilings when something is too large to look at directly. Then I texted Owen one word. "Thursday," he replied. I called him. He picked up on the first ring. I told him. 3 seconds of silence. "You're kidding." "No." "You're genuinely not kidding." "No." "Okay," he said. "Okay. Come over. Right now. We need to actually talk about this." "It's 10:30. Right now," he said. The investment closed in June. Not massive. Not a number that makes headlines. But enough. Enough to go full-time. Enough to step away from the job, properly, with gratitude and a month's notice, and put everything I had into what I'd been building in the margins for over a year. My manager, Cole, a straight-talking man who'd always been honest with me in both directions, shook my hand on my last day and said, "I always thought you had something like this in you." "I wasn't sure I did," I said honestly. "That's usually how it works," he said. "The people who know for sure they're going to do something like this often aren't the ones who actually do." I thought about that sentence for a long time after. The apartment, by then, had transformed into something that felt like a real home. Not just a place I slept. A place that had intention behind it. I'd gotten furniture I actually liked, chosen because it fit the space, not because it was functional enough to do the job. There were 3 plants I'd somehow kept alive, which continued to surprise me on a daily basis. The desk by the big windows had become the center of my mornings. Good light, a coffee setup within arm's reach, a city slowly coming to life below. On weekends, I'd started running again. Something that had disappeared quietly in the last stretch of the relationship. Not intentionally abandoned, just slowly deprioritized the way things are when comfort becomes the default state. I was in better shape than I'd been in 3 years. Not because I was trying to prove anything to anyone, just because I had energy now that I hadn't had before. The kind of energy that comes when you stop distributing it in all the wrong places. In July, a message appeared in my Instagram DMs. The filtered requests folder, the one most people forget to check. I almost missed it. But I was doing a deep clean of the account that evening, organizing contacts, and there it was. Tessa's account. The message was short. "Hey, I've been following what you've been up to. I just wanted to say that it genuinely looks like things are going really well for you." "That's great. I'm really happy for you." I read it twice. Set my phone down on the table. Picked it up. Read it a 3rd time. "I'm really happy for you." There was a part of me, I'll be honest, that felt a pull to respond. Not out of longing, not out of lingering resentment, but out of some instinct toward resolution, toward closing loops cleanly. But I also understood, very clearly, that this message wasn't just about being happy for me. It was a door, opened carefully, just wide enough to see if I'd step through. I left it on read, not to punish her, not as a power move, but because I genuinely did not have a version of that conversation in my head that ended anywhere good for either of us. Owen found out I'd seen it when I mentioned it offhand a week later. "You left it on read?" he said. "Yeah. That's cold." "It wasn't meant to be cold." "Then what was it?" I thought about it. "Accurate," I said finally. Meaning I didn't have anything to say that was honest and also kind at the same time. And I wasn't going to say something dishonest. Owen looked at me across the table. "You still have feelings for her," he said. "I had feelings for her," I said. Present and past tense aren't the same thing. Sometimes they blur. "They hadn't blurred in a while," I said. He considered that. Then, "Okay. Good," I offered. He smiled. "Good," he said. I didn't reply to the message. Not that night. Not the following week. The window closed the way these things close. Not dramatically, not with a final confrontation, just quietly, with time, the way a conversation does when no one picks it back up. In August, I was introduced to someone new. Her name was Petra. She worked in brand strategy, the kind of person who asks one question in a room full of people and suddenly everyone's rethinking what they thought they already understood. We met at an industry event Owen had spent 2 weeks convincing me to attend. I almost didn't go. I was in the middle of a development sprint. The couch had been winning the internal argument for about 20 minutes. Then Owen texted, "You need to leave the apartment. The plants cannot be your only company. They are not enough." I went. Petra and I ended up talking for 2 hours. Not in the way you talk at events, the 30-second version of yourself, polished and abbreviated. In the actual way. She asked about the tool after I mentioned it casually, and instead of moving on politely, she asked a follow-up question. And then another. And then, "Who's your biggest bottleneck right now from a growth side?" I told her. She thought about it for a few seconds. Then she offered a perspective from the brand positioning angle that I'd never considered and genuinely hadn't heard from anyone. When the event started winding down, she handed me her card. "I'd like to hear more about how the launch actually went," she said. "Yeah," I said. "I'd like that too." We got coffee the following Thursday. 2 hours turned into 3 without either of us noticing. I walked her to her car, and she said, "Do this again?" "Yeah," I said. Next week, I said. I drove home with something I'd forgotten the feeling of. The specific lightness of something starting. Not forced, not manufactured, just beginning. By September, the tool had cleared 5,000 active users. I'd started writing a newsletter, originally just to think out loud, to work through problems and writing the way I'd always processed things. And it had developed a quiet following. People who cared about building things. Workflow, tools, creative businesses run sustainably. It wasn't a big audience, but it was the right one. Speaking invitations started arriving. Not major stages, but real ones. A creative entrepreneurs conference in October. A virtual panel on product-led growth in November. Things I would have hesitated over a year before, when I wasn't sure I had anything worth saying publicly. I said yes to both. Petra came to the October conference, not to watch my talk. She had her own session on brand clarity for product companies. I watched her from the back of the room. She was the sharpest person on that stage. Sharp in the way that's effortless, not performed, not trying, just natural. I stood at the back of the room and thought, yeah, this is something good. We weren't official yet at that point, but we were becoming something. The kind of something that forms the way stone forms, not in a single moment, not with a declaration, just through consistent pressure and time until one day you look and realize you're looking at something solid. That's when Gwen called me, out of nowhere, late on a Tuesday night in October. We'd stayed loosely in touch after running into each other on the sidewalk, but we didn't call each other. Hey, she said. Hey, everything okay? Yeah. Okay, this is weird, but Tessa called me. I went quiet. She hadn't called me in months, Gwen said. Out of nowhere. I was actually surprised she still had my number. What did she say? I asked. A pause. She said she'd been watching what you've been doing. The tool, the newsletter, the conference, all of it. She said she saw some photos. Okay, I said carefully. She said she was proud of you, Gwen said. That was the word she used. Proud. Yeah. A beat. And then she said it wasn't fair. I held very still. She said all of this, the place you're living, the thing you built, all of it. She said that's exactly what she wanted. That's the life she was trying to reach for. And she said she felt like she'd walked out one door before you opened the one she actually wanted to walk through. I didn't say anything for a moment. She said she thought you could become that person. I said slowly. That's what she told me. She always said she thought you had potential. But she didn't think it would happen on a timeline that worked for her. I said. I think that's right, Gwen said quietly. So it was a calculation, I said. Not angrily. Just recognizing the shape of something. Maybe, Gwen said. I don't think she's a bad person. I know she's not, I said. I never thought she was. I just thought you should know, Gwen said. I'm glad you told me, I said. And I meant it. I thought about that conversation for a long time after I hung up. Not in a churning, painful way. In the way you think about something when it confirms something you already half knew. Because here's what that conversation gave me. A word for what had happened. A calculation. Tessa had looked at me, at us, and she'd run the numbers. Not heartlessly. I don't think she was heartless. But she'd assessed the odds. Risk versus reward. Timeline versus certainty. And she'd decided the return wasn't guaranteed enough to justify staying. That wasn't love being afraid. That was something else. That was love being conditional in a way I'd never fully named before. And the hardest part of that realization wasn't anger. It was the quiet recognition that somewhere in that kitchen in January, cold coffee in hand, I'd already sensed it. I'd already known, on some level, what was actually happening. I just needed the door to click shut before I admitted it to myself. There's a specific kind of grief that comes from realizing a relationship ended not because of something dramatic, but because someone ran an actuarial table on your potential and came back with a probably not. No explosion, no betrayal, just a quiet, careful rejection of a future they didn't believe was coming. I'd sat with that grief in the first weeks after January. I'd understood it in pieces over the months that followed. And now, hearing Gwen describe Tessa watching from a screen as everything she'd calculated against started materializing anyway, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not bitterness dressed up as something cleaner. Just compassion, actually. Because I understood, from the inside, what that must feel like. To be someone who made a decision based on the best information they had. And then watch the information change. Watch the math shift. Watch the long shot come in. That's not a fun thing to sit with. And I didn't want that for her. I genuinely didn't. I just also understood, with absolute clarity, that her discomfort with the outcome didn't make the outcome wrong. It just made it hers to carry. Not mine. She texted in late October. My actual number. Not Instagram. The number she still had. Hey, I know this is out of nowhere and you don't have to respond. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. I saw the clip from the conference that Owen posted. You were incredible up there. I've been watching what you've been building, and I'm honestly so impressed. I miss you. I miss us. Can we maybe talk? I read it in the parking lot outside a grocery store, sitting in the car longer than I needed to. The engine off. Just sitting. There was no anger when I read it. I want to be clear about that. No spike of satisfaction. No impulse toward cruelty. There was just something very quiet and very settled inside me. Like a door that had closed months ago. Key already put away somewhere you'd have to go looking for it. I thought about what I would have given to receive that text in February. How those words would have landed when I was still waking up on Saturday mornings to the texture of someone's absence. When I was still catching myself reaching for my phone to send her something and stopping mid-reach. That version of me would have called her back within the hour. Would have driven to wherever she was. That version of me was gone. Not bitterly. Not forcibly removed. Just gone. Replaced by someone who'd built something in the space she'd left. I understood what she was responding to. She wasn't responding to me. She was responding to the version of me that had emerged after she left. She didn't miss who I was. She missed who I'd become. She wanted to enter the finished house and call it hers. But she hadn't been there for the building. And the building was the whole story. I typed a reply. Deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Opened it again. And finally wrote, I really appreciate you reaching out, and I mean that. I'm genuinely glad things have been going well. But I'm in a really good place right now, and I want to protect that. I don't think revisiting this would be good for either of us. I hope you find exactly what you're looking for. I really do. I read it once. Then I sent it. I put my phone in my pocket. Went in and bought my groceries. Came home. Made dinner. Went to bed. She replied an hour after I sent it. I didn't read it until the next morning. I understand. I do. I just want you to know that I never stopped believing in you. I think I got scared of the uncertainty. And I know now that I was wrong about the timeline. I read it once. Nodded slowly. Set my phone on the counter. Made coffee. Gwen asked me about it a few weeks later. She told me she reached out. Gwen said, yeah. And I told her I'm in a good place and wanted to stay there. Gwen was quiet for a moment. She said she respected it. She said, good, I said. A beat. She's doing okay, Gwen added. In case you were. I was wondering, I said honestly. And I'm glad. I meant both of those things completely. I didn't want Tessa broken. I didn't want her struggling somewhere. I just didn't want to be part of her story anymore. I'd started writing my own. Petra found out about all of it in November. Not from someone else. From me. We were sitting on the floor of my apartment with takeout containers between us. Neither of us had wanted to sit at the table that night, which is something that happens when you're comfortable enough with someone to make those small, irrational choices without explaining them. She asked about my last relationship the way people ask when they're trying to understand the geography of how you got to where you are. I told her, not every detail, but the shape of it, the kitchen, the cold coffee, the phrase. She listened without interrupting, without preparing her response while I was still talking. When I finished, she said someone like you. Yeah. What do you think she meant by that? I think she meant someone who hadn't arrived yet, I said. Someone still mid-construction. Petra looked at me. You were always going to arrive, she said. How would you know that? I said, you met me after. Because people who build something for 14 months at 5 in the morning without anyone watching, she said, those people always arrive. They just don't announce it on the way. I looked at her for a long moment. That's a very confident assessment of someone you've known for 3 months, I said. I'm a very confident person, she said simply. I laughed. She smiled. Something settled between us. Easy and solid and real. The kind of thing you recognize when you felt its opposite. Here's where I am now. The tool has cleared 15,000 active users. There are 2 people on my team. Felix, a developer I hired in the fall, and Ren, a designer I found through the newsletter community who has made everything look better than I ever could have managed alone. The newsletter is growing faster than I can track some weeks. There's a second partnership in discussion. 2 more speaking invitations for the spring. Things I don't say out loud much, because there's a version of announcing your own progress that starts to smell like compensation for something. I don't need to announce it. It's just happening. The corner apartment still gets that golden light in the mornings. The plants are inexplicably still alive. Petra is in my life in a way that doesn't feel like addition. It feels like fit, like something the space was designed to hold. She pushes back on my thinking in ways that are inconvenient and almost always correct. She laughs at things that are actually funny and not at things that aren't. She doesn't need me to be a finished version of anything. She's interested in the version that's still in progress. That's a different thing entirely. That's the thing I didn't know I was looking for until I found it. Owen came over for dinner last month. He sat at the table, the real one, the one I chose because I liked it, not because it was available, and looked around the apartment with the expression of someone doing a quiet inventory. "Do you ever think about what you would have told yourself a year ago?" he asked. I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "Why not?" "Because that version of me needed to go through all of it," I said. "I wasn't ready to be here until I'd been through that." Owen nodded slowly. "She was the exit," he said. "She was the door," I corrected. "The exiting was my job." He smiled at that, poured more wine, said nothing. That specific silence between two people who've been friends long enough that not every thought needs sound. I think about the kitchen sometimes. The cold coffee, the click of the door, the silence that followed. I used to replay it looking for what I could have said, what argument I could have made, what version of myself I could have shown her to change the math. I don't do that anymore. Not because the memory isn't there, but because I understand now what I couldn't see in January. She left because she didn't believe in the timeline, and the timeline turned out to be the whole point. If she had stayed, if I had made the speech, made the case, and she had stayed, I think I would have kept building, maybe, but differently, slower, with one eye always on whether it was enough to satisfy a doubt that was already written into the walls of us. The relationship had become a place I was comfortable, and comfortable, for me at that particular moment, had become a reason not to move. Her leaving broke that open, and everything that followed grew out of that crack. Someone like you. I used to hear those words with something sharp in them, something that cut on the way down. Now I hear them differently. Now I hear them as someone I couldn't yet fully see, someone still in the middle of becoming. And the becoming, well, the becoming happened on its own schedule, as it always does, as it was always going to. The last I heard about Tessa, through Gwen, always through Gwen, was that she'd relocated to a new city, new job, new beginning, moving forward. I was genuinely glad. I hope she found the certainty she was looking for. I hope she found someone who was already where she needed him to be. And I hope, wherever she landed, she stopped measuring her life against other people's timelines. Because that's a math problem with no right answer. She watched my life from a screen. That's what Gwen told me. She saw the apartment. She saw the product launch. She saw the conference. She saw the newsletter milestones I posted when they happened. She saw the photos of someone standing beside me in two of them, uncaptioned, unbothered, present the way people are present when they're actually part of your real life. She saw the arrival and wanted back in. But she wasn't there for the building. And the building is the only part that was actually mine. I closed my laptop one morning, the one I keep at the desk by the windows, and looked out at the city. The light was doing what it does in the early hours, catching the edges of buildings, turning everything briefly gold before the day officially begins. 15 minutes, maybe, of that particular quality of light. And then the day, I sat in the gold light, thought of nothing specific, just the quiet that settles into a life when you've stopped waiting for someone else's verdict on whether it's enough. Not everything she said was wrong. She was right that I wasn't settled when she left. She was right that I was still figuring things out. She was right that she needed a certainty I couldn't offer her in January. All of that was accurate. She was just wrong about what it meant. She thought it meant the destination wasn't coming. What it actually meant was the build was in progress. And you don't get to mourn missing the house after you walked away before the roof was finished. No villains in this story. No one behaved unforgivably. No dramatic confrontation. No moment of calculated revenge. Just a woman who made a calculation. And a man who decided, quietly, that the best possible answer to being underestimated was to build something undeniable. Not to prove her wrong. Not to be vindicated. Just to prove, to himself, that the thing he believed in was real. And standing at those windows in the morning, with good coffee, and actual light, and a life assembled with both hands from scratch, I'd say that's exactly what happened. I want to say one more thing before I close this out, because I think it matters. I don't tell this story to make Tessa a villain. I don't tell it to position myself as someone who wants something. I tell it because I think a lot of people have been handed a version of someone like you at some point. Delivered politely, delivered carefully, but landed like a verdict on who you are and what you're capable of. And I think the answer to that verdict, the only answer that actually means anything, is not to argue, not to explain, not to chase. It's to build, quietly, without asking anyone's permission, without needing anyone's belief. Just build, with whatever you have, from wherever you're standing, and trust that the timeline belongs to you, not to the person who stopped believing in it. That's the only part of this I'd want anyone to take with them. Not the story of her watching from the outside. Not the door, or the coffee, or the click that ended things. Just that. Build anyway. She said I wasn't someone she was ready to settle down with. She was right. Because what came after wasn't settling. It was moving. Faster and further than either of us could have mapped from that kitchen in January. And some people, when they see you move like that, want back on the train. But the train doesn't stop for passengers who already stepped off. It just keeps going. The door clicked shut in January. Quietly. Without ceremony. Without a scene. And the rest of the year was entirely mine.